The Japanese feel that both parties bear responsibility and the war is already over, so they feel no resentment even though they lost. But to the Chinese, the Japanese surrendered on their own terms, and they never got a punch back. The anger in their guts haven't subsided. I'll bet that difference in tone between the two countries get more and more twisted over the next 100 years, turning into something disastrous. Yuki was surprised by Alan's cool analysis. He had already calmly understood at least some of the feelings that she had thought a Japanese man would never understand. If he understands that, then why doesn't he just, not hate Chinese people? It's understandable. All of the Chinese felt some remaining sadness and anger towards the Japanese because of the war. The war was over, and it wasn't permitted for them to resolve this problem through violent means. They wanted to take revenge by other means, but no matter how hard they tried, it could never compare to the losses suffered in that gruesome war. Yeah, that's usually how it works. She knew full well that this was a negative emotion, not a cultural problem. However, there's no energy as simple as anger. It releases exactly as much energy as it receives. That is not true. Yuki, you should definitely know that. The anger would never go away unless they, by their own hands, reduced Tokyo to a pile of rubble like Chongqing. And since they couldn't do this, their anger would never go away. I don't know if it's... Hey, you destroyed one of our cities? We're gonna destroy your capital. That doesn't sound equal to me. I'm just saying. Of course, they also understood that doing such a thing wouldn't heal anyone. If the Japanese have trouble understanding their anger, they should think of it this way. Let's say the Chinese military attacked Japan, reducing all of it to rubble. Then when the Japanese military resisted and was about to strike back, a major disaster strikes China. The Japanese government accepts an unconditional ceasefire on humanitarian grounds. Sounds good to me. If the Chinese then said, hey, war's over, so let's all get along, would the Japanese be able to accept it? No. We paid reparations, so forgive our indiscriminate, massive air raids on Tokyo, okay? Man, those Japanese guys sure complain about the old war a lot, even after taking our money. Depends how much reparations. If they demanded that they be forgiven for trampling on Japan's human rights, it'd be hard to do. It's hard to forgive. The Japanese in the ruins of Tokyo would probably have shed frustrated tears, wanting to make Beijing meet the same fate. See, that's more equal, at least. In the end, unless they could have equal revenge against their enemies, it would... God damn it. It would never stop eating at them. At the moment, China and its countrymen were enjoying the feeling of being a victor nation, so their anger toward Japan had subsided. The Japanese were curled up as members of a defeated nation, and as long as they stayed down, the Chinese could probably keep their anger tucked away in their hearts. However, the Japanese felt that both parties had received their due punishment. Japan had been damaged no less than China, and they had paid reparations, so they felt all debts had been settled. Some even felt that since infrastructure had been built under Japanese rule in China, the Chinese should even be grateful. Really? Hey, you should be grateful Chinese are building infrastructure now. 100 years from now, Japan would surely try to erase the memory of the war, calling it focusing on the future or something, and proclaim that they'd left behind their status as a defeated nation. I mean, that's just how all nations are. With any kind of tragic history, they always downplay, we're looking to the future. I mean, you could just look at slavery, for instance. Every country never wants to acknowledge that, no matter what, no matter the consequences of said shit. Different various wars, proxy wars, all that stuff. Everyone wants to downplay it. When that happened, the Chinese people of the future probably wouldn't accept it. After all, They had been able to postpone their anger at the Japanese because the latter was still hanging its head as a defeated nation. Yuki was vaguely starting to realize something. This was a fatal difference in culture between China and Japan. The concept of apology had a fatally different value to the two nations. To the Japanese, an apology is something you accept when you receive it. Of course, it wasn't easy to accept it when you're still pissed off at someone. However, accepting it anyway and giving forgiveness is thought of as an action that shows off your tolerance. On the other hand, if you keep refusing an apology, you'll be thought of as immature, and people will look down on you, even if you're the one being apologized to. Also, if you do accept the apology, then the crime is totally forgiven, and it's supposed to be unmanly and shameful if you ever bring it up again. Well, I do agree, if you actually do accept an apology, bringing it up again is like, dude, shut the fuck up. You accepted it. Get over it. However, this is only how the Japanese think, of course. The Chinese think differently. In China, an apology is something carried out when one claims to have been reborn as a new human. One who won't commit the same sin again. Ah, that's pretty fucking cringe, not gonna lie. Only when it's acknowledged that you've been reborn will the crime of your previous life be forgiven. I really don't like that concept. That is really fucking toxic. Therefore, if the criminal forgets his regret and returns to how he was before his rebirth, that pardon will naturally be rescinded and the criminal will go back to being treated like a criminal. So the Chinese would continuously check whether Japan still remained reborn as a new country, repentant of its war sins. Oh god. I'm not gonna fucking flagellate myself just because, oh god, for all time I have to for always be apologizing for this. Nah, fuck that, dude. I paid my debts, I'm moving the fuck on. That's the difference. An apology is you make a sincere effort to restore someone to their previous state, or maybe a little bit better than what they were off before the problem arose, and then that's it. It's over. I've done my restitution. It's over. You can't bring it up again. If you're in a better spot than what you were before I did something, like after I've paid my restitution to you, after my reparations to you, you need to shut the fuck up and move on. That's how an apology should work. However, to the Japanese, the 1978 Sino-Japanese Friendship Treaty meant that China had to accept Japan's apology. So according to Japanese culture, China was acting dishonorable whenever it brought up a sin it had once forgiven. Yeah, you know what? If there was a fucking treaty that said, we forgive you, get over it. You signed it. China, following Chinese culture, decided that its forgiveness of Japan would be rescinded since its latter had forgotten its regret and was trying to return to a pre-war state. And the biggest tragedy is that neither side understands this difference between their cultures. To a Westerner, it's hard to imagine that there can be such a difference in values between these two neighboring countries, who even write with the same characters. But please understand one thing, Westerners aren't the only ones. How can we ever reach a mutual understanding with the Chinese? Oh, it's impossible, isn't it? It came so quickly that Yuki was ticked off. I mean, if it's a cultural issue, there is actually no way to fix it. Unironically, there is no answer. Alan, realizing he had misspoken, grimaced and hurriedly tried to smooth things over. In the sense that you need a third-party arbitrator to settle the dispute, and you have to accept that third party as a neutral. In this case, it would probably be America. Someone that is completely removed, well, quote-unquote removed from the situation. Probably the EU, actually. They're way more impartial in this situation. That will adjudicate and separate out punishment, and you have to accept. Both sides have to accept it and get the fuck over it. That would be the only way that you could actually move forward. But you know what? In this world, there's all kinds of people that you just can't get along with. Instead of worrying about not getting friendly with people like that, it's better to use your time to search for a new friend instead. But in reality, Tokyo is currently filled with many Japanese and Chinese people living side by side. It'd be one thing if there was an ocean separating them. But since we're living in the same city, can we really ignore a problem like that? No, you can't ignore it. it is something that's really hard to fix, and like I said, you need someone else to decide it for you. But just thinking it's going to fix itself by, like, just over time or something is foolish. I don't think we can. I believe we can understand each other as neighbors living in the same city. Looks like the overseas education isn't anything to sneeze at. I really think what you're saying is wonderful. So, do you know what about the porcupine dilemma? Or whatever that was called? The porcupine dilemma? I'm surprised you've heard of such a thing. Hey, that's racist. When two porcupines try to huddle together, they injure each other and the quills all over their body, with the quills. They want to be close to their neighbors, but if they get too close, they'll end up hurting each other. In the end, even though they acknowledge each other as neighbors, it's desirable for them to keep a proper distance between themselves as they interact. Got him at fucking porcupine sex. No thank you. At least that's how the fable goes. Even though I'm pretty sure, like, they, like, naturally lay down, and they only get up when it's, like, defensive, I think. But at the same time, they can fall and, like, stab themselves with their quills. Maybe they're just fucking stupid. There's no need to get too close. If you do, both sides will end up hurt. The Japanese think of Chinese as obstinate guys who keep hating us for the war no matter how much time passes. The Chinese think of the Japanese as ungrateful people who don't thank the Chinese enough for postponing the revenge that the Japanese deserve. Then why don't the Japanese keep giving honest apologies? They can just keep saying they regret starting the war. I think that's the right thing to do. I think Japan will continue to do that in the near future, and it'll eventually calm down. But that's like watering plants in a desert. It'll never end. It'll be fine for us in the war generation, but future Japanese people born after the war won't understand why they're apologizing for a war they had nothing to do with. They'd be treated more or less like slaves, forced to eventually eternally pay off a debt they carry since the time of their births. I'm sure even the Chinese wouldn't go that far. The Chinese just want to see a heartfelt apology from the Japanese, I think. They certainly don't want to make them slaves. I wonder, in the first place, is there some agreed upon line where if the Japanese do this much, the Chinese will forgive them? That's unreasonable. You can't expect someone that's grieving for an issue to actually have a concrete line like that. It is impossible to have. There's nothing like that. They're only postponing their anger while the Japanese are curled up as a defeated nation. They will never forgive them. That's all. And so it's impossible for the Japanese and Chinese to ever understand each other. QED. I took Latin. I took debate classes. I'm a fucking debate lord. It was the sound of Yuki slamming her hands against the table, rising to her feet. Fucking facts and logic don't care about your feelings, Yuki! It rang throughout the restaurant, and all the waiters and customers turned to look. But she's completely right. At some point, obviously, they're not going to hold it on. It would be ridiculous. But at the same time, this is a huge war. It has lasting repercussions. You have to expect that the apologies are going to last for a really fucking long time. Like, the apologies are going to have to be proportionate to the damage you did. So, like, being like, well, how long do we have to actually apologize for? This war literally ended 4 years ago. There is a lot of it, actually, a different time because it didn't end in 1945. I think it ended like 6 years ago, 7 years ago in this timeline. One of those. Like, right as, like, the war was starting to turn, the shit happened. So, I mean, you have to acknowledge that people aren't going to move on that fucking quickly. It's going to take a really long time. Why are you making so many one-sided assumptions about the Chinese? Yuki? Yeah, there was a war, and a whole lot of people died. I'm sure there's all sorts of grudges from that which can never be wiped away. But we should still be able to understand each other. We've interacted with each other for over 1,000 years, right? We've shared many bits of culture and advanced our own particular cultures, making us like a family that acknowledges one another. It's idiotic that those 1,000 years of interactions and friendships could all be lost because of a single war. Of course I know there's a lot of anger and sadness out there that can never be healed. A lot of Chinese and Japanese people were hurt. They bore resentment and sadness. I know they wouldn't even want to look at each other for some time. Well, I mean, to be fair, this is fixed in like 3 generations. That's it. And it's over. That's how long it'll last. Because the first generation, the war kids, the people that were born from the people that are directly affected, well, obviously they're going to know about it. They're going to know the pain. They're going to know the suffering. Those kids, their kids, the grandkids of the people that were, like, killed, they'll hear from their grandfather, like, how shitty it was. The kids after that, they're not going to have ties. There's going to be very, very, very few people that had great-grandparents at that time that were alive that talked about the war. From that point on, great-grandchildren and onward, it's not going to be that bad. Because we're 3 generations removed. And even, like, we paid our restitutions, all that. We paid reparations, blah, 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 blah. After that point, they're not going to actually be demanding as much of an apology at that point. It's just not going to happen. In that case, we just need to give them time to cool their heads, then start back at square one, looking for a way to hold hands again. Exactly. I agree. Queen! So, what gives you the right and qualifications to decide on your own that you will never understand each other? It is actually for the Chinese to set their qualifications. You can't set the line for them. It's really shitty. I mean, that's the same as punching someone, falling down, breaking your leg, and saying, dude, we're equal. Calm down. Why are you so fucking mad, dude? I said I'm sorry. How long do I have to apologize for it? Like, you can't do that. You can't set the term. Yuki's shoulders heaved with her breathing, and tears fell from her eyes. Queen, no, come back. A feeling of intense regret rushed through Alan. He hadn't said that because he wanted to make her look like this. She took out her wallet out of her handbag, put a new $500 Japanese note on the table, and spun around. However, she tripped on her high heels she still wasn't used to wearing and crashed down on the ground. Alan rushed toward her and offered a hand, but Yuki slapped it away, sobbing. Alan couldn't do anything but stand there, stunned. This is your fault! It's because you're fucking racist. She's a cutie. You fucking dick. One of the meeting rooms in the occupying forces headquarters was a mess. Countless American soldiers were carrying in cardboard boxes, packed with papers, meeting desks, and blackboards. A massive map of City 23 was on display. On it, the bases and areas of influence held by all of Primavera's crews were drawn in detail. Sweet. I love that. Next to that, pictures of the faces of Primavera's executives were laid out in a pyramid, with red lines connecting them. At the top was Madame Rose. To her right was Consigliere Richard. Below Rose was Grand Boss Cyrus Saimura. As you travel below him, it radiates out into the bosses of all the crews. In the same way, face shots of the GDS executives were posted separately and Sun Zilong at the top, and the young execs, Lee included, beneath him. The once bleak conference room had been reborn as a secret planning room of an anti-organization crime team led by a Gabriel. As he looked at all the materials posted on the wall, Butler was amazed at how well researched they were. If you knew this much, you hardly need me. That's not at all the case. It's vital to have information from someone who's acquainted with them, and has even connected with them privately. Nothing private about it. This is all my official work, Major. Their personalities, hobbies, patterns of behavior, family relationships, and friend relationships. There's no such thing as too much information. All the paperwork brought into this room is bloodless. You are the one who will finally bring it to life. Almost like a baby swan, waking from its sleep. Don't tell me. You mean to do your job for real? My job is eradicating organized crime, after all. It's very easy to imagine the feud between Primavera and the GDS influencing the GHQ's rule of Tokyo. You must be joking. The GDS maybe, but Primavera? It's just a slightly disreputable citizens organization led by a dreamer girl who prattles on about ideals. Phil, let's put a stop to all farces between us, seeing as how we both despise them. Know that you will be punished if you break this rule. Uh-oh. I haven't been punished since I had my ass hit by a teacher's cane in school. In the first place, I reject the whole concept of a necessary evil. I don't feel any need for organizations such as the Mafia to exist. Oh, really? They can be pretty useful. Oh, and what use can they be? When your superior's birthday is coming up, you just make a single phone call and they can get them a birthday cake, a bed, and 3 naked beauties. According to my information, you received 3 women on your last birthday. They were requested to have a bust size over 90. King! Or was it 5? Forgive me, my memory on the matter is vague. Even better! Wait, really? Guess I'm no match for you, Major. Apparently Gabriel had been secretly investigating City 23 for over a year. The GHQ, feeling threatened by the rise of the Cable family at the time, had probably been secretly investigating City 23 since then. Surely the subject of their observation switched to Primavera after that. They'd probably investigated on their own, knowing that the City 23 occupying forces HQ was deep in bed with Primavera. Butler hadn't believed it at first, but this man probably did have actual evidence of Butler's corruption. However, he still couldn't level accusations against Butler because Butler had evidence of corruption by important people in the GHQ. By now, Butler was getting into the habit of showing a negligent attitude, somewhere between exasperation and resignation. Gabriel couldn't kill him, but he was stuck in a cage, from which there was no escape. He couldn't play dumb or confuse the issue. He was basically at the point of saying whatever happens, happens. Butler wasn't the only one in this situation. The higher officials of the occupying forces HQ, from the Director General downward, had all been profiting from their positions. All of them were being forced to live with the sensation of this man's cold knife at their necks. By now, no one in the HQ could talk back to Gabriel. He had even announced he would postpone his punishment of them, as long as they didn't get in his way. Even the Director General had to avert his gaze and quickly walk away whenever Gabriel was around. They'd petitioned GHQ officials to whom they had corrupt relations for Gabriel's dismissal, and they searched for other weakness in various limited ways, but all their efforts had ended in failure. This man's history was as pure as white as fresh morning snow, without any wounds or stains. An excellent track record. Irreproachable conduct. He was an elite among elites, who had received several awards. Given that, they wanted to find a weakness among his relatives, but he had no family. His only relatives were on his mother's side. That mother came from a famous family line, which included senators and governors. He had no weaknesses. It's true that bad people are good at trampling good people, but there's no way to meddle with a good person so fastidious that he doesn't have a single stain on him. You see, I hate the Mafia. Maybe you should try throwing some darts at those villains on the wall. It seems some of the upper echelons think I like you do. That mafias can be useful if properly tamed. But to me, the Mafia are an absolute evil. Like Satan, I believe they're a wicked group that must not be spoken to much less negotiated with. I'm confident that sending them from this earth to hell is an absolute mission given to me by God. Do you have a grudge against the Mafia or something? Yes, I do. You see, I want to stain these hands red with Mafia blood. After all of my accomplishments and efforts until this day have been for the sole purpose of achieving that goal. Ah, come on, that's a spicy joke for such a pretty face. It most certainly is not a joke. I may use my authority and my methods that I please to destroy criminal organizations. Do you realize how hard I've worked to get a chance to hear those words? This guy's serious. Maybe the fastidious nature brought about by his good upbringing had caused him to ruthlessly despise the dark side of human society. This is Gabriel Cabrera, sure, was serious. He hated the Mafia, and he stated truthfully that he didn't mind staining his hands blood if it meant destroying them. For the first time, this made Butler shudder. Yeah, because this dude's fucking crazy. Butler had looked down on him for being apparently a well-raised rich kid, but that wasn't it right now. This man only seemed to have a well-bred, fastidious beauty because he was so straightforward, filled with an absolute straightforward madness that made him want to murder everyone in the criminal underworld. Butler's old instincts were warning him. They warned him against ever dealing with such a man. That's right. If he weren't my superior officer, I'd definitely run for it.